I'm going to go ahead and read chapters 10, 11, and 12. Chapter 10. Penny wakes every morning asking for her doodle, a soft brown stuffed animal that might be a monkey or maybe a squirrel. It's still beat up. Nobody knows for sure what it really is. She drags it everywhere. Doodle, she cries if it's been caught in her blankets. Doodle, she cries if it's right next to her. Of course, it sounds more like doo doo when she says it. That makes Dad crack up. I smile when I hear footsteps outside my door. Big ones and little tiny ones. My mom and Penny. And Doodle, of course. Sometimes my legs and arms are stiff from being in the same position all night, and sometimes my toes tingle. My bedroom door opens. Dad never gets around to fixing that squeak. Mom traces a finger along my cheek. Maybe she's checking to see if I'm still breathing. I am. I open my eyes. I wish I could say, "Good morning," but I just grin instead. She pulls me up and hugs me, rarely stopping to sit in the rocking chair anymore, and rushes me to the bathroom because I usually have to go really bad first thing in the morning. Penny trails behind us, wearing a huge red and white hat like the the cat one in The Cat in the Hat. The girl has a major hat obsession, and always with her doodle. Butterscotch is never far from her. She lets Penny put hats on her and somehow endures Penny's hugs, which can sometimes feel more like chokeholds. I've gotten a few. She barks to alert Mom and Dad if Penny gets too close to an electric plug or the front door. Our bathroom is painted ocean blue and is large enough for Penny, Butterscotch, me, and Mom in my chair without feeling crowded. That's a good thing because we spend lots of time in there. Penny and I make pretty big messes, but at least I don't have to wear diapers. It's bad enough that someone has to put me on the toilet, but diapers? Ugh. Even though the doctor said it would be impossible by the time I was 3, Mom had me potty trained like any other kid my age. I hated sitting in dirty diapers and she hated changing them. So I figured out a way to let her know I had to go, and she'd hustle me to the toilet. Mom and I can sometimes talk without words. I point to the ceiling and she somehow just knows whether I'm talking about the ceiling fan, the moon, or the dark spot where the rain leaked through during the last thunderstorm. She can tell if I'm sad and she can sense when I need a hug. She rubs my back and makes me relax when I'm tense and upset. She tells dirty jokes sometimes when Dad isn't listening and we both crack up. One morning, as she was getting me dressed for school, I pointed to her stomach, then covered my eyes as if the sight were too much to look at. It was shortly after Penny had been born, and she still had a good-sized baby bulge. "You call me fat?" she asked, acting insulted. I laughed a little and said, which is the closest thing I've got to a yes. "Take it back," she said, tickling the bottom of my feet. Instead, I held my arms out like I was making a big circle and laughing out loud, huge, enormous, like an elephant. I could tell she knew what I was thinking. We both rolled with laughter, and then she hugged me tight. I wish I could tell her I loved her. Mom knows when I'm hungry and thirsty and whether I need a glass of milk or just some water. She can tell if I'm really sick or simply faking it because sometimes I do pretend I don't feel good just so I can stay home. She can tell what my temperature is just by feeling my forehead. She only uses the thermometer to prove she's right. I can tell stuff about what she's thinking too. By the end of the day, after she's been at the hospital all day, then fixed dinner, then bathed Penny and me and put me in the bed, I can tell she's kind of reached her max. She breathes hard. Her forehead is sweating. I sometimes reach out and touch her hand with mine. I can feel her calm down, and she'll trace her finger along my cheek just like she does in the morning and give me a kiss goodnight. Every Saturday morning, after I've been fed, Mom reads the newspaper while she has her coffee, and Penny smashes bananas on her high chair tray. Butterscotch doesn't like fruit, but she stays close by, just in case somebody drops a piece of bacon. Mom's off on the weekends, so she relaxes. She sometimes reads articles to me or tells me about the latest hurricane or uprising or explosion in the world. "More fighting in the Middle East," she says. "I've seen it on TV. Bombs and tears and faces of fear. There's a new Superman movie coming out soon," she reads as she shakes the newspaper flat. "Maybe we can catch a matinee." I love superheroes. I guess Superman is my favorite because he can fly. How great would that be? Mom reads me the comic pages also. I like Garfield. Garfield is cheating on his diet again, Mom says. He ate John's lasagna and Odie's meatballs. I laugh and point to mom's hips. You calling me fat again, Miss Dee Dee? Just because I finished off your spaghetti last night? I grin. You'll be sorry when I start feeding everybody lettuce for lunch. We both laugh. Mom's not even close to being fat, but I like to tease her. For my 10th birthday, I got a whole book of Garfield cartoons. Now that's what's up. I made Dad read it to me over and over. Garfield is a cat who has a lot to say, but all his words are written in little circles above his head. He can't really talk, of course. He's a cat, but sometimes that's how I feel. Like, wouldn't it be cool if I had somebody to write the words over my head so people would know what I'm thinking? I could live with that. Large floating bubbles above me speaking for me. Wouldn't it be cool if somebody could invent a bubble talking machine before 5th grade starts in a couple of weeks? Ha! When I try to talk, the words are exploding in my brain, but all that comes out are the meaningless sounds and squeaks. Penny can say lots of words and pieces of words, but my lips won't come together to make even simple sounds like that. So most of my noises are vowels. I can say and pretty clearly. And if I concentrate, sometimes I can squeeze out a buh or a huh, but that's it. My parents can usually figure out what I need just by listening carefully. To outsiders, I probably sound like one of those children who has been raised by wolves. My communication board, even with everything Mrs. B has added to it, well, it sort of sucks. For example, one afternoon earlier this summer, I had a taste for a Big Mac and a shake. Vanilla, I love fast food. Mom wasn't home, and getting my father to figure out what I want is sometimes a big job. I pointed to the picture of my dad, the word go, the word eat, and a happy face. That's all I had to work with. I got to give him credit. He tried. He asked me a million questions so I could point yes or no. Are you hungry? Yes. Okay, I'll fix you some tuna salad. No. I pounded on the tray. I thought you said you were hungry. Do you want some spaghetti? No. Gentler this time. So what do you want? No answer. Nothing on my board could describe it. I pointed to go again. You want me to go to the kitchen and cook you something? No. You want me to go to the store? No. I was starting to get upset, pounding the board with my right thumb once more. I don't get it. You said you wanted me to get you something to eat. Yes. Once again, I pointed to Dad's picture, then go, then eat, then happy face. I could feel one of my tornado explosions starting. I started to kick and my arms got all tight. It was driving me crazy that I couldn't tell him about a stupid Big Mac. Calm down, sweetheart, Dad said softly. My jaws felt like steel bars. I knew I was breathing hard and my tongue wouldn't stay in my mouth. I hit my board once more, aiming at no word in particular. Urgh, I screeched. I'm sorry, Melody, but I can't figure out what you mean. I'm going to fix you some noodles and cheese. Will that be okay? I sighed, gave up, and pointed yes. I calmed down while he cooked. The noodles were pretty good. A couple of weeks later, my dad and I were in the car and we passed a McDonald's. I screeched and kicked and pointed like Godzilla was coming down from the street. Dad must have thought I was nuts. Finally, he said, would you like to stop and get a Big Mac and a shake for dinner tonight as a treat? I shouted, "Oh," as loud as I could and kept on kicking with absolute delight as he pulled into the drive-through. He never did make the connection between the fast food stop and my request a couple weeks earlier, but that's okay. Even though it took us an hour to finish, it was one of the best hamburgers I've ever had. Moving on to chapter 11. 5th grade started a few weeks ago, and a couple of cool things have happened. Well, I didn't get a gadget that makes Garfield like speech bubbles over my head, but I did get an electric wheelchair. Excuse me. And our school began something called inclusion classes. I thought that was funny. I've never been included in anything, but these classes are supposed to give kids like me a chance to interact with what everybody else calls the normal students. What's normal? Duh. Comparing my new chair to my old one is like comparing a Mercedes to a skateboard. The wheels are almost like car tires, which makes the ride smooth and easy, like riding on pillows. I can't go very fast, but I can propel myself down the hall with just a little lever on the handrail. Or if I flip the switch to manual, I can still be pushed if necessary. When Freddie first saw it, he shouted, "Woohoo!" like I just won the Indy 500. Millie goes, "Zoom, zoom now." Want to race? He spun his own chair in excited circles around me. I'm sure he could beat me, even at the subatomic speeds our chairs are set to. My electric chair is a lot heavier than my manual chair, and it's almost impossible for Mom and Dad to lift anywhere. When you decide to switch to a rocket ship for transportation, Dad joked at first, rubbing his back, you're gonna need to hire Superman. to get it in the car. I grinned, but I know he saw the thanks in my eyes. So he bought a set of portable wheelchair ramps that fold and fit in the back of our SUV. With those, he can roll the new chair into the back of our car and still have back muscles left over. For me, it's all about the freedom. Now, I don't have to wait for somebody to move me across the room. I can just go there. Nice. So when they decided to start mainstreaming us into regular classes, the electric chair was really helpful. Our fifth grade teacher in room H5 reminds me of a television grandmother. Mrs. Shannon is pudgy, wears lavender body lotion every single day, and I think she must be from the South because she talks with a real strong drawl. Somehow it makes everything she says seem more interesting. She told us on the first day, I'm going to bust a gut making sure y'all get all you can out of the school year. You hear? We're going to read and learn and grow. I believe every one of y'all got potential and stuffed inside, and together we're going to make some of that stuff shine. I liked her. She brought in stacks of new books to read to us, as well as games and music and videos. Unlike Mrs. Billups, Mrs. Shannon must have read all of our records because she dusted off the headphones and even brought in more books on tape for me. Y'all ready for music class? She asked us one morning. Let's get this inclusion stuff going. I jerked with excitement. As the aides helped us down the hall to the music room, I wondered if I'd get to sit next to a regular kid. What if I did something stupid? What if Willie yodeled or Carl farted? Maria was likely to blurt out something crazy. Would this be our only chance? What if we messed this up? I could barely contain myself. We were going to be in a regular classroom. The music teacher, Mrs. Lovelace, had been first to volunteer to open her class to us. The music room was huge, almost twice as large as our classroom. My hands got sweaty. The kids in there were mostly fifth graders, too. They'd probably be surprised to know that I knew all their names. I've watched them on the playground, at lunch, and at recess for years. My classmates sit under a tree and catch a breeze while they play kickball or tag, so I know who they are and how they work. I doubted if they knew any of us by name, though. Well, the whole thing was almost a disaster. Willie, probably upset and scared about being new in the room, started yelping at the top of his lungs. Jill began to cry. She held tightly to the hand grips of her walker and refused to move past the doorway. I wanted to disappear. All of the normal children in the music class, I guess, about 30 of them, turned to stare. Some of them laughed, others looked away, but one girl in the back row crossed her arms across her chest and scowled at her classmates who were acting up. Two girls, Molly and Claire, everyone knew them because they were mean to almost everybody on the playground, mimicked Willie. I made sure they stayed just out of the teacher's line of sight, but I saw it. So did Willie. Hey, Claire, Molly said, twisting her arms above her head and bending her body so it looked crooked. Look at me. I'm a retard. She laughed so hard she snorted snot. Claire cracked up as well and then spit dribble out of her mouth. Da ba wa ba, she said, crossing her eyes and pretending to slip out of her chair. Mrs. Lovelace finally noticed them because she said sternly, Stand up, please, Claire. I didn't do anything, Claire replied. You stand up as well, Molly, Mrs. Lovelace added. We were just laughing, Molly said defensively, but she stood up next to Claire. Mrs. Lovelace took both girls' chairs and slid them over to the wall. Why'd you do that? Claire cried out in protest. You have perfectly good bodies and legs to work. Use them, Mrs. Lovelace instructed. You can't make us stand the whole time, Claire moaned. The Board of Education requires that I teach you music. There's nothing in the rule book that requires you sit down while I do it. Now stand there and be quiet, or I'll send you to the office for showing disrespect to our guests. They stood in the middle of the third row of chairs where everyone else was seated comfortably. They stood. This teacher was awesome. After that, things went more smoothly. Jill, who had continued to cry, had been taken back to our room by one of the aides. The rest of us sat quietly in the back of the room. Mrs. Lovelace began class once again. I think we need a moment to gather ourselves, children. She sat down at her piano, began to play Moon River, and then she switched to the theme song from one of those new vampire movies. Oh yeah, she knew what we liked. When I started seeing the colors, I knew she was good. Forest green, lime green, emerald. I glanced over at Gloria. Instead of sitting all curled up like she usually did, her arms were outstretched like she was trying to catch the music and bring it to her. Her face was almost glowing. She began to sway with the music. Then Mrs. Lovelace completely changed tempo and played the opening notes to Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Willie clapped his hands wildly. Finally, the teacher started to play Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. Dad would have loved it. Kids started to shimmy in their seats. Maria got up and started dancing. She clapped loudly, never quite on the beat, but to a rhythm that was all her own. Mrs. Lovelace paused at the end of the song. Music is powerful, my young friend, she said. I can connect us to memories. It can it can connect us to memories. It can influence our mood and our responses to problems we might face. She cut her eyes at Claire and Molly, who still stood in the empty places where their chairs had been. I wanted to tell Mrs. Lovelace I like music too. I wanted to know if she'd ever heard the song Elvira or if she would teach us how to make our own music. I tried to raise my hand, but she didn't notice me. It must have looked just like another one of the random movements that kids like me seem to make, but I had the feeling that Mrs. Lovelace was someone who'd take the time to figure me out. The teacher went on, before I continue with the lesson, let's make this a real inclusion experience. Perhaps our friends from room H5 would like to sit with the rest of us instead of being stuck in the back. Freddie heard that and took his chance. He put his chair into gear and zoomed to the front of that big room and shouted, I am Freddie. I like music. I go fast. The class laughed. I can tell the difference between people making fun of us and people being nice to us. Freddie could too, so he joined in on the laughter. Mrs. Lovelace looked momentarily startled, then went over to Freddie, shook his hand, and welcomed him to class. She sat right there in front next to a boy named Rodney. Rodney gave Freddie a high five, and the two of them grinned at each other. Okay, I had to admit, I was jealous. Mrs. Lovelace asked an aide to bring Gloria down front, close to the piano. A girl named Elizabeth glanced at Gloria nervously, but she didn't move away when Gloria was wheeled next to her. Elizabeth's best friend is a girl named Jessica. At recess, they sit together near the fence and share granola bars. I've always wondered what they whisper about. I also noticed that everything Elizabeth does, Jessica tries to outdo. Like if Elizabeth beats her running to the fence, Jessica insists they run so she can win too. Or if Elizabeth gets a new book bag, Jessica will have a new one the next day. So when Elizabeth started talking to Gloria, who looked terrified, Jessica raised her hand and asked if one of the H5 kids could sit next to her. Maria might have trouble figuring out some stuff, but she's a real friendly person. I want to sit by the blue shirt girl. I want to sit by the blue shirt girl, she demanded. She stomped down to Jessica's seat and sat down next to her. Then she jumped back up and gave Jessica a hug, then gave a hug to the kid sitting closest to Jessica. One kid stiffened up when she touched him, but I was surprised that most of them let her hug them. Molly and Claire, since they were standing, had no choice. Oh, yuck, Claire whispered. Cooties, Molly whispered back. Mrs. Lovelace raised an eyebrow, then cleared her throat. It seems like you two like to stand. You'll continue to do the rest of the week. Oh, man, this sucks, I heard Claire say. Molly had enough sense to say nothing. Maria didn't notice. She even kissed Claire on the cheek. That was funny. Willie ended up next to a large, friendly boy named Connor. Ashley and Carl were absent that day, so that left me sitting in the back of the classroom by myself. The room got real quiet. I suddenly felt cold, like the air conditioning had been cranked up real high. I got goosebumps. The teacher looked around the room, expectation on her face, I guess hoping that somebody would volunteer to take me. At that moment, I would have given anything to be back with in our Bluebird room instead of sitting there with 30 kids staring at me. Finally, a girl got up out of her seat and walked over to my chair. She squatted down and looked at me directly in the face. Then she smiled. It was the girl with the long hair who had frowned at her friends for laughing. I'm Rose, she said, her voice soft. I smiled back and I tried really hard not to kick or grunt or make a noise that would scare her away. I held my breath and thought about calm, quiet things like ocean waves. It worked. I inhaled deeply and slowly, then pointed on my board to thank you. Rose seemed to understand. I showed her I could power my own chair and I rolled to where she'd been sitting. We sat together for the rest of the class, and I didn't do a single embarrassing thing. It ended way too soon. But ever since, every Wednesday, our little class of outcasts gets to join Mrs. Lovelace's music class. It's awesome. Jill, Ashley, and Carl eventually became part of the group. Each one of us had been assigned a buddy to sit next to and interact with. Once they met her, all the girls rushed to be Ashley's buddy. I think it's like playing with a pretty little doll for them, but Ashley seems to like the attention. Claire and Molly eventually got their chairs returned, but they haven't chosen to be buddies for anybody yet. That's fine with me. Elizabeth and Jessica have stuck with Gloria and Maria. Jill sits contentedly next to a girl named Aster Chang. Rodney actually comes over at recess and talks to Freddie. Sometimes he pushes Freddie really fast in his chair. Freddie loves that. And I get to sit with Rose every single Wednesday. On Tuesday, I can hardly sleep because I'm so excited. I make my mother pick out my nicest clothes on Wednesday morning, cool outfits like the other kids wear. I screech at her until she gets just the right combination. I make sure she brushes my teeth so my breath won't stink. I think about Rose all the time. I worry that she will change her mind and not like me, but Rose talks to me like I understand, and she tries to figure out what I'm saying as well. One day I pointed to new and shoes and nice on my communication board, then down to her feet to let her know that I had noticed she got new sneakers and that I like them. At first, she seemed surprised that I could do this, especially since it sometimes takes me a long time to make my thoughts make sense using my board. One day I pointed to music and bad and stinky. Then I started laughing. Rose didn't get it at first, so I pointed to the words again, then pointed to Mrs. Lovelace, who was playing some kind of jazz music on the CD player. I'm like, Mom, not a big jazz fan. It confuses me because it doesn't have a tune. Rose finally figured it out and said, "Oh, you don't like jazz? Me neither." We both laughed so hard, Mrs. Lovelace had to put her finger to her lips to tell us to hush. Never in my life have I had a teacher tell me to be quiet because I was talking to somebody in class. It was the best feeling in the world. I felt like the rest of the kids. Rose tells me secrets sometimes. I know she bites her fingernails and she hates milk. She goes to church every Sunday, but falls asleep until it's over. Me too. She has a younger sister just like I do. She even likes country music. Sometimes she tells me about trips to the mall with her friends. It would be so tight to be able to do that. Chapter 12. By the end of October, the inclusion program has been expanded. Maria and Jill have been added to art and gym classes, and Freddie and Willie go to science. Me, it's the first time I've ever gotten to change classes for different subjects in my life. Now, when the bell rings, instead of wondering what's happening out there in the halls, I'm out there too. It's awesome. I plow through the crowds in my electric chair like a power mower in thick grass. Sometimes kids wave or say, "What's up?" Every once in a while, someone will even walk with me to the next class. Cool. But inclusion doesn't mean I'm included in everything. I usually sit in the back of the room going crazy because I know answers to things and can't tell anybody. What's the definition of the word diggity? One of my teachers asked a few days ago. Of course I knew, so I raised my hand, but the teacher didn't notice the small movement I'm able to make. And even if she were to call on me, what then? I can't very well yell out the answers. It's really frustrating. During parent conferences earlier this month, my parents came in to meet Mrs. Shannon and the other teachers. Instead of leaving me on my own in a corner somewhere, Mrs. Shannon pulled me into the circle of teachers who were involved in the inclusion program. She's so great. She patted the arm of my chair and smiled. This child's got some serious smarts. She's going to be our star in the program. I did my usual screeching and kicking. I think I would have kissed her if I could, but that would have been pretty sloppy, I guess. Well, it's about time somebody recognizes what we've always known, my dad told Mrs. Shannon. We really appreciate the opportunity to let her show what she can do. Mom was especially pleased to find out I'd been assigned a mobility assistant, an aide of my own. Finally, Mom said, relief in her voice. We've been asking for this for years. Budget busts and paperwork, a system that runs on grits instead of good sense. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Shannon replied, shaking her head. I'm trying to get all the students in H5 the services they need, but I smacked an aid for Melody way up to the top of my list, so we'll see how it goes. I'm expecting a wonderful school year. So cool. I tapped on my board. An aide. Wow, this person's job would be to take me to classes, sit with me, and help me participate. I wondered what she'd look like, or maybe I'd get a guy. Would he be young and cute or old and grumpy? The very next day, my new aide was at school before I was chatting with Mrs. Shannon in room H5 as we kids were wheeled in. She came right over to me and took my hand. Hi, Melody. I'm glad to meet you. My name is Catherine. I go to the university. I'm going to be your deals in wheels every day. She talked to me like I was just like any other student, not a kid in a wheelchair. I tried not to kick, but it was hard to hold in my excitement. Cute t-shirt, she said, as she checked out Tweety Bird on the front of the new lavender top Mom had bought for me. I pointed to thanks on my board. What's your favorite color? she asked then. I pointed to purple, but then quickly slid my thumb over to green. I grinned to her. You're quick, Melody. I can see we both like weird colors. We're going to get along just fine. Catherine was dressed in purple tennis shoes, green tights, a purple suede skirt, and the ugliest green sweater I've ever seen. I wanted to tease her about her outfit, but I didn't want her to think I was mean. After all, I just met her. I searched all over my board for a way to jokingly make fun of her clothes, but I couldn't think of a way to do it, so I gave up. It is so hard to say stuff. So now it's Catherine who helps me at lunch so I don't make a mess, and Catherine who reads off the answers I point to on my board. She's added some more words and phrases to it, and she helped Mrs. Shannon order the books I need to read. She even makes sure the headphones don't fall off my ears. The regular fifth grade language arts teacher, Miss Gordon, is not much older than Catherine. She almost explodes with energy and makes books seem like live action plays. She jumps up on the table. Sometimes she sings. She lets the class act out parts of a story, and sometimes she even turns books into games. Vocabulary bingo, Mrs. Gordon announced one morning. Donuts to the winning team. As they played, my classmates broke their necks to get the right definitions, screamed out answers, and groaned when they messed up. In just half an hour, every student in the room knew all 20 vocabulary words. Miss Gordon gave donuts to the losing team too, but the winners got the ones with the chocolate sprinkles. I knew all the definitions, but the other kids moved too fast for me. Chocolate would have made a mess on my clothes anyway. One unusually warm day this week, Miss Gordon brought in fans and spray bottles of water and let us eat popsicles in class. Orange ones, of course, in honor of Halloween, while she read poems about pumpkins and ghosts. Catherine held my popsicle for me with a paper towel under my chin. We didn't spill one drop. Miss Gordon does other cool things too, like when she decided the class would read the story of Anne Frank, she had kids take turns squeezing into small space she had built under a table so they could understand how Anne might have felt. I couldn't do that, but I got the idea. And she's assigned other great books this semester. I'm listening to Shiloh by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor and The Giver by Lois Lowry. And there's one called Tuck Everlasting. The kid never gets to grow up. Staying a child forever is not as cool as folks may think. Because of Mrs. V, I could actually read the books, but the print is usually very small, and it's hard for my eyes to stay on the right line. And nobody has figured out the best way for me to hold on to a book without it falling on the floor a million times. So I usually choose the audiobook instead of the written version. I can even take tests now. Catherine reads me the questions and I point to the answers on the sheets and she places on my tray. I pass every single test and she doesn't help me one single bit. I would probably get 100% on each one. But some of the questions require long answers. I just can't explain with the words on my board. One time in spelling, Miss Gordon read the words aloud and I pointed to the letters on my board. Catherine wrote down what I pointed to so I could follow along with the test. Claire and Molly, who are always watching me, it feels like, began to complain. It's not fair, Claire cried, waving her hand to get Miss Gordon's attention. Catherine cheats for her. What is it with those two? It's like they're jealous of me or something, and that's just plain crazy. At the same time, I realized that they actually thought I had it easier. That sure was a first. Last Monday morning, Miss Gordon told the class, as some of you may know, because I do this every year, our long-range fifth grade project this year is our biography unit. We will read the biographies of famous people, do a report on a famous person of your choosing, and each of you will also write your own autobiography. Well, it's going to be short. What can you do in 11 years? Connor, the big kid, shouted out. Everybody laughed. In your case, Connor, Miss Gordon replied, I'm sure you'll think of way too much. Can I do my report on the guy who invented hamburgers? Connor asked to more laughter. I doubt if we know who made the first burger, but you can do your report on the person who founded McDonald's. He's got rich off hamburgers and fries. Awesome. My kind of dude, Connor said. Rose raised her hand. I love the fact that she's in all my inclusion classes. Miss Gordon, when is all this due? Rose is the type of student who takes all kinds of notes in a bright red spiral planner and never misses a homework assignment. Relax, Rose. We've got until the end of May, and I'll walk you through each segment, one step at a time. Tomorrow, we'll talk about how to write your memories. Rose seemed satisfied, but I noticed she scribbled almost a whole page in her notebook. I'd given anything to do that, but working on stuff the teachers in regular classes assign is just plain awesome. History class is even better than language arts class. Even though the teacher, a man named Mr. Dimming, has None of Miss Gordon's spark. Balding and pudgy, he's been teaching at the school for over 20 years, and kids say he's never been absent, not even once. Clearly, he loves what he does. His car is always in the parking lot when our bus rolls in, and always there when we leave for the day. He dresses like a TV preacher in three-piece suits with vests most days. I've never seen him without a crisp white shirt and colorful tie. I wonder if his wife picks them out. Some of them are really sharp. Mr. D loves history. He can quote facts and dates and wars and generals like somebody on a game show. I bet he could win on Jeopardy! The other students don't seem to like Mr. Dimming much. They call him Dimwit Dimming behind his back. I think that's sort of mean because Mr. D is really smart, smart enough to run the quiz team. When Mr. Dimming got to American presidents in class, I rocked. He gave the students a list of presidents and all their vice presidents and told us there would be a test in a week. Catherine read the names to me several times. I've never even heard of some of these men, she admitted to me. She admitted to me as we went over the list for the first time. Hannibal Hamlin was Abraham Lincoln's first vice president. Who knew? I memorized them all. When Mr. Dimming gave the test, all I had to do was point to the right answers. He checked to make sure that Catherine wasn't helping me. I even finished before some of the others. While Mr. D was returning the test papers, he gave the class a few minutes of free time to sharpen pencils or stretch or talk. I was surprised to see Rose walking toward my desk. How did you do on the test, Melody? She asked. I only got a 75. She looked disappointed. I'd gotten an 85, but I was so excited she'd come over to me that I got all mixed up. So I pointed to 5 and an 8 on my board. She touched my arm, her eyes full of sympathy. Don't worry, she said. You'll do better next time. And she did this right in front of Molly and Claire and the rest of the class. There's no way I was going to tell her what I really got on the test. I tried to think of something to say so she'd stay longer. Pretty in shirt was all I could come up with using my lame board. I sure could use a word choice that said cool outfit, but somehow Mrs. V had overlooked that one. But Rose beamed. You look nice today, too. I didn't really. I had on a faded blue shirt and matching sweatpants. Mom hardly got me anything else these days. But I hate sweatsuits. If I could choose, I'd wear blue jeans with sparkly decals, a blouse with decorated buttons, and a vest. But I had no way to tell Rose that, so I just pointed to thank you. Incredibly, she touched my arm one more time. Then she went back to her seat and her friends. Then the bell rang, class was over, and I had to go back to H5. No more inclusion, no more rows, and 4 more hours left of school left. Even Catherine left. She had an afternoon class at the university and hurried to get there on time. Mrs. Shannon was out sick that day, so I sat quietly with Ashley and Maria and Carl and Willie while we watched The Lion King again. I've seen it a million times. I can quote it. Then the substitute teacher gave us a math lesson. Addition again. When am I ever going to get long division? I wondered what Rose was doing. It was a very long afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there.